I live large chunks off grid. I'm off grid right now. I don't have a TV. I haven't had a TV for years. My wife, before I met her, she didn't have a TV. I didn't have a TV when we met. We still don't have TV. But even I am aware, sadly, of the Barbie movie, that it's a thing. It's pretty popular right now at the time of this recording. What does that have to do with gunfighter life? Stand by. Recently asked patrons for some of the episodes that they really liked that made an impression on them, in that kind of realm. Really had an impact, remember them as being important to them, or whatever the case is. One of the ones that came up was the tactical Barbie episode. And I thought, hey, Barbie movie's out right now. Maybe you're tired of that and you want some tactical stuff. So I'm going to put this one out. It's a rerun. Yes, I had a brand new episode already recorded. I think that I'm going to replace, because my goal for so long was to get more and more and more downloads, listens, which by God's grace that happened. And I thought that people to support the show, patrons, would also go up kind of congruently. Like if my listeners went up tenfold, my downloads went up tenfold, the Patreon income would go up tenfold, and it hasn't. So I'm trying to figure that out and get more people to Patreon. When this episode airs, there will be a brand new episode. Brand new. On Patreon. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. It will be a video podcast. What I consider a really important one. It'll be a video podcast of me going over really common handgun platforms in a visual format. Like comparing side by side a 1911 and a 2011, a 1911 to a Glock. Like, what's the difference for the end user? Not the marketing hype, not this, not that, but what are some real meaningful differences? How do they compare? How does the SIG 320 compare to the Glock when we actually look at the internals? If you see value in that, if you think that's worth $1, or any of this content is worth $1, consider going to Patreon. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. I would like for you to become part of the tribe if you're a regular listener. And if not, listen to this rerun and don't feel guilty about it. But if you're an avid listener and you want to support the community and you want that kind of content, there's a lot of Patreon-only content on there. But if you want that video podcast, especially of me going over different common handgun platforms and comparing them, and what's the real rub? What's the difference for the gunfighter? What are the advantages and the detriments to each platform? I think I went over 1911, 2011, Beretta 92 family, SIG 226 family, SIG 320 family, the Glock, the Smith & Wesson M&P. Comparing, contrasting. If you see any value in that, consider clicking the link. It should, by God's grace, come out the same day that this episode comes out. So if you want that content and you want to support the podcast, the message, and let's be honest, you want to support me, I'd appreciate it. A laborer is worthy of his wages. Hopefully you think that video podcast is worth $1. Consider going to Patreon. All right, with that, I'm going to plug in Tactical Barbies. Guns don't have to be pink to be pretty. Here you go. Tactical Barbies. And no, I am not talking about shaving a Barbie doll's hair off and making her look like G.I. Jane. That's ridiculous. What I'm talking about is kind of playing dress up with your guns. Taking a gun's base elements and kind of dressing them up, making them fancy, either for, honestly, a lot of people do it, I think, just for looks. Kind of actually playing dress up with their guns. They have a bunch of guns they have in a case or they keep in a safe, and they're pristine and they have all these different aesthetics. Don't actually use them hard. And then some people actually do certain things to their guns to help improve the form and the function and work better for them. Anyway, there's a couple of platforms that really lend themselves to this. If this appeals to you for any of those reasons, like you want a gun, maybe I should say erector set, if you were blessed enough to have erector sets as a kid. I would say Legos, but I think erector set's a little bit more creative. If you're the kind of person that likes to build, have that inner engineer, and you really like to make something, and you want to use a base, Firearm, to build something unique, something different, something suited to you, something that just appeals to you either for aesthetic reasons and or, because it can be both, practical reasons. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. With that, where to start? I'm going to start with the Glock, because if there's any gun that needs some modifying, let's be real, it's probably the Glock. And that might anger a lot of people, but a lot of people that even say, oh yeah, it's Glock, Glocks are awesome, and they drink the Glock Kool-Aid. You look at their Glock and it doesn't have Glock sights, not factory sights a lot of times. So they're modifying their gun. So let's start there, since it's probably the gun that needs the most modification out of the box. Big fan of modifying the Glock if you're going to run one. Now I have just a factory stock Glock 17 that I keep because when I do teach and train and go to classes, that's what the vast majority of people will run is a Glock, and I want them to see that I'm a good shooter because I'm blessed by God with the talent, not because I'm running some fancy STI. So I'll often just shoot what I would consider kind of the lowest common denominator gun, a Glock, and I'll keep mine pretty much factory option sights, all that, and run it. But if I had to run one, I would certainly want to modify it if it was like my go-to handgun. So let's play tactical Barbie here a little bit with the Glock. As just came up in the Patreon chat, one of the guys was asking about if you should get a PSA dagger because it takes Glock mags, and my advice to that was no. One, it hasn't been around long enough to be proven, and it doesn't seem to be that reliable as far as other reviews go, even when people get sent them for free. So I'm going to say no. I'm going to say if you're going to want to do that because you want a better grip or whatever, buy an old used beat up Glock, fill the backstrap with some kind of epoxy, and take a Dremel to it and get the grip that you want. And you can take some silicone carbide, sand like that, give it some grip texture or stipple it. You might want to practice on an old holster or something else first too, but stippling is not that hard. And make your own frame out of an old Glock frame, and don't mess with any of the internals or anything, because that's one of the, if not the only really redeeming quality of a Glock nowadays, is they're reliable. If you just reshape the polymer of the grip, it shouldn't really affect the reliability at all, as long as you're not messing with the internals. So I would do that. I wouldn't really mess with the slide all that much, other than maybe putting some grip tape on the front of it. But the Tennifer or whatever coatings they use on Glock slides, to give them credit where it's due, is really good and really resistant to adverse conditions. So I wouldn't mess with that. I would put on some better sights. I like straight black sights and a tritium fiber optic front. I don't like Glock's optic mounting system, so I would probably get an older regular Glock and have it milled out for a direct RMR mount. No adapter plates or anything. I'd screw that sucker right down with the beefiest screws I could get directly onto the slide. If I could get it milled out like that, that'd be fantastic. And if I was allowed to, if I was doing it professionally with department policy or whatever, I would certainly put a better trigger in it. And if not, I'd probably throw a bunch of polishing compound in there or some lapping compound and shoot it a bunch, which should help the trigger out quite a bit. That's probably what I'd do from a gunfighting perspective, because I more care about the form and function. But there's all kinds of things. I just looked up for fun to put in the chat last night, Gucci Glocks. And there's all kinds of Gucci Glocks. Ones that actually have like the Gucci and I think like Louis Vuitton logos and stuff printed on them, and Cerakote and whatever, which is kind of about as close to a tactical Barbie as you can get, right? You're literally dressing it up and making it an accessory. You certainly can do that with a Glock. You see it done all the time with Glocks. I'm all about Cerakote. Cerakote is a very good coating. It does a lot for a lot of metal finishes, but again, that tenifer or similar finish that Glock uses on their barrels, on their slides, is really good, and I think as good or better than Cerakote is. Also, the polymer doesn't really need a coating because it's polymer, right? It's not rusting. If you're doing that, realize you're doing it kind of for the looks of it. Now, I do, again, like Cerakote and Duracoat and things like it for certain firearms, especially firearms without such a good coating. But just realize if you're doing that, why you're doing it. But I don't think there's any arguing that the Glocks are probably modded as much as any other gun. Talking about it like a complete overhaul. Just keeping the frame. You're building a hot rod, you could get those Roni kits. They have those. That's a pretty cool mod for a Glock. Although that was more viable when you were allowed to do the pistol brace thing. Don't know what's going on with that. We're getting close. I don't know when you listen to this, but to kind of the deadline for that. And I'm hoping there'll be some kind of resolution on that, but it is what it is. The Roni kits are still pretty cool, and obviously they're pretty prevalent for a Glock. The next one I'm going to talk about, the Ruger 1022. It is unarguably the most modular 22. It's perhaps one of the most modular and accessorizable firearms, 22 and centerfire and everything else included, period. But certainly of the 22s, it's the most modifiable, the easiest to play dress up with. And there are some really good reasons. There's nothing wrong with an out-of-the-box, especially out-of-the-box stainless Ruger 1022. They're fantastic. They're a good place to start new shooters. If you're getting into shooting, if you want a good survival kind of battery 22, they're good for a lot of things. They also leave a lot of things to be desired in certain areas. Their triggers are kind of like the Glock trigger on a rifle. They leave a lot to be desired. And they make even Ruger makes an aftermarket trigger that you can just put in. So I think even Ruger acknowledges their factory 1022 trigger is less than stellar. So you can certainly mod it that way. Tactical Solutions, I'm a big fan of their company and their products to make really good aftermarket barrels that are both light and accurate and just fantastic in quality. And a lot of them come with iron sights, which I'm a big fan of, as opposed to a lot of other brands that don't. They're real big in the Steel Challenge world. So certainly if I was modding one for like performance, it's not my go-to survival gun. It's not even my secondary. It might be like my third option for like a go-to survival long gun. So I haven't done this to mine, but something like that is really cool. I also like the takedown versions, and they make takedown models. They also make the Magpul stocks. A really cool and practical way, I think, to dress up your 1022. They also have the Magpul and others with different stocks. They have some that will hold spare magazines in the stock. That's a really cool and practical option. Again, they make takedown stocks, folding stocks, and there's a lot of practicality and cool factor there. So if you're kind of looking for a budget way and you kind of have this inner engineer and you just like to modify stuff, you might look at a Ruger 1022. It's a good place to get started with this. And really kind of easy, unlike taking a Dremel to the frame of your Glock. You can a lot more safely take the stock off of Ruger 1022 and put a different stock on it. And if you don't like it, you can put the original stock back on. Unless you do something crazy, there's probably no harm, no foul. Taking the barrel off a 1022 is basically taking the stock off in 2 hex screws. I think they're hex screws. It's been a while since I've done it. But basically 2 screws on a locking block that holds that barrel in. Really, really easy. There's all kinds of cool mods. You can modify it to be a super accurate kind of tack driver. You can modify it for speed like a Steel Challenge gun. You can modify it for ultimate survival, making the ultimate survival 1022. Takedown, holds extra ammo, camo it all out, maybe get a Red Dawn collage done on the stock, whatever you want to do. There's no denying that the Ruger 1022 is kind of the way to modify a 22. It's the platform for that. So I think if you want to modify a 22, there's no better platform. It's almost without argument that the 1022 is the most modifiable 22 platform. Now, let's talk about the AR, right? It is kind of the Lego set for tactical men. You just buy a lower, and then next week you can save up some money and buy a lower parts kit. You save up and, buy a complete upper, which if you're new, I would say buy a complete upper. That's the one place you can really run into some issues and some dangerous stuff. You can also, if you're fairly mechanically inclined, like change your own brakes and stuff like that, you can assemble your own upper. But you literally can build it piece by piece. It is very easy. Again, except for the upper and attaching the barrel to the upper receiver, you really can just kind of assemble it and play Legos with it. You want a different handguard. You don't like this handguard. You want a quad rail, and then you don't want a quad rail because that's so early 2000s, and now you want M-Lock, key mod, whatever it is. You can do that. You can build anything from a super long range, precision, AR, and whatever caliber, 6.5 Grendel, to your ultimate favorite hog hunting platform in 6.8 SPC. You can build a super up close and personal CQB, a short barreled AR. I guess now you'd have to get a tax stamp for it, but you get the idea. Super modular. You can pretty much build what you want. So many. I mean, the last time I went to a gun show, I was kind of saddened because although I like the AR, it was like a big giant chunk of the gun show was just these Barbie doll ARs with like different color coatings and different fancy rails and table after table after table of basically the same gun with different furniture. And again, I like the AR, but there's a lot of other stuff out there. But they are certainly modular. Again, you could just buy a lower and then save up some money and decide you want this pistol grip and then this stock and you want this trigger and then, oh, you know what, I thought I wanted a 2-stage, but now I want a single stage. It's so modular. Sometimes I think some people like building the guns more than they actually like running and gunning with the guns and shooting the guns and training with the guns. That's not me. I usually will modify a gun and build a gun because it's something I want to use and run. But I do know that that is a subsection of the gun community. They just want to build cool stuff. And hats off to them. And there's no argument the AR is way easier to do that with than its competitor, the AK or Mini 14. You can certainly modify those guns, but nowhere near to the extent and the ease that you can with an AR-15. Now let's talk about one kind of ingeniously, I think, developed from the manufacturer to be a tactical Barbie. The SIG 320. You literally can just buy the fire control unit from SIG. They list it on their thing. I'm sure you have to get it sent to an FFL. It's the firearm part. You can literally, I think they have a firearm builder right on their website. You can go on their website and play tactical Barbie. You can say, oh, I want this slide. Oh, I don't like the way that looks. Let me put a different dress on it. And, oh no, I don't like that grip module. Let me put a different skirt on it. And you get a different grip module. And you can literally sit there on their website and play tactical Barbie and build your own gun. And again, except for the fire control unit, which you should have to get through an FFL, you can just order from their website, which I think, again, is kind of genius. A grip module, a slide. They even do optics. You can order the optic. You can get an optics mounted slide. You can get a different barrel. You want a threaded barrel. You want a gold barrel. You want to put some bling on it. Whatever. Barbie's going to a fancy dinner. You want to put some gold on there. You can do all that right on their website, which, again, I think is pretty genius. So the 320, it's about as, that's kind of its thing, right? It's modular. You have one grip module and who knows how many different configurations. Pick your own adventure gun. You can go all the way from like subcompact to full size or even, the even bigger competition models, all based on that same fire control unit. So it is perhaps the most, so in that way, it's perhaps the most accessorizable. You can literally go to the website and if you have a fire control unit, kind of build a gun. And there's a lot of other companies that make really good stuff for the SIG 320s. They've kind of taken over. I don't think they're anywhere near the market share that Glock has, but they've certainly come on strong in the past, I don't know, let's say 5 years. And they certainly have a better trigger. And the fact that the grip frame is modular, I think they start off with better ergonomics, even with the just regular factory 320 grip. But with the modularity of the grip frames, you certainly can get a lot better ergonomics, in my opinion, than you can with a Glock. To be fair, I think they're a little bit more overly complex in their operating mechanism and the number of parts than a Glock. But they seem to be fairly reliable, right? Although I don't think I would have picked them for the U.S. military sidearm, I haven't seen them vomit them out of their mouth yet. Which tells me they must not be breaking in large quantities yet. It says something about their reliability. What's that old kind of a joke in the Marine Corps? You give a young Marine 2 bowling balls and tell him to make sure you keep these safe, and you come back the next day and one's lost and the other one's broken. So if they can stand up to that kind of abuse, I think that speaks well of them as far as reliability goes. Again, I don't think I would have picked them, but to be fair, right now on my hip I am carrying for my CCW today a SIG M17. And since I will tell you how I've modified mine. And again, I do modify my guns, but I do it for a purpose. I got the Wilson Combat Grip module. I think it has a little bit better texture than the factory grip module. I think it's also a little bit better ergonomics. And I mounted a Trigicon RMR, the one that does not take batteries, the one that's tritium fiber optic. And I put in a SIG factory trigger, not the entire grip or fire control unit, but just the trigger itself. Those can be changed out, and I put a flat trigger in it because I prefer a flat trigger. Same trigger pull, same all that stuff. I just actually changed the trigger shoe, the actual interface, because again, I prefer a flat trigger. And I actually did do something to this gun to kind of dress it up, and I put a Bible verse on the backplate. So there you go. I didn't just do it for form and function. I actually put it on there. And the one I picked was Psalm 23, a portion of that psalm. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So there you go. Everything else is pretty much stock, I think. Same barrel, same slide, same grip module except for the trigger shoe. And I also run it with the go-to mag as an aftermarket mag because the SIG factory flush fit mag rattles around like a soda can full of rocks. Can't stand it. If I'm trying to be sneaky, I don't need my gun rattling around. My gun should be able to be as quiet, at least, as I can be in an environment. Anyway, if you're more interested in that gun, I did a whole review on that gun, a year in review of this gun that I'm carrying today. It's not my main or my favorite carry gun, but it is the gun I am carrying recording this podcast, just coincidentally, so I will mention it. Also, this is nothing new. I mean, it even predates firearms. You look at a lot of people, they would modify their swords and armor and get them engraved and all that stuff. I think it's part of warrior culture. You look at even African hunter-gatherer tribes or American Indians. They modified their weapons. They did things to them, both for form and function, to work better for them, and literally just for show. And this is an old school version of that, not as old, but in the firearms world, the 1911. These have kind of been modified for a long time for competition shooting, for duty use before they were all coming with Novak sights. That was a pretty common thing to have them cut for Novak sights. Getting the slide scalloped, getting front serrations put in, and or getting the ejection port widened. Kind of how Wilson Combat, I think, got their start. And you can certainly do that. I mentioned these at the end because this is kind of more advanced. Modifying and kind of playing dress up with a 1911 is not as simple as it is with a Glock or a 320. A lot of the parts have to be hand fitted and hand tuned. So this is kind of a master's level of doing it. If you're an engineer, if you're a machinist, if you are competent with jeweler's files and things like that, then absolutely, you certainly can modify a 1911 and you can build kind of whatever you want. But it's not as easy plug and play as it is with a lot of other things. A lot of things should be, even if they'll work, should be kind of hand fitted and hand tuned. But you certainly can trick those out. Anyway, with that, I'm going to roll into the tactical tip of the day. I don't often mention products, but I literally looked down and it was right there, which tells you how much I use it. And it's not expensive. It's a Winchester kind of gunsmithing driver kit. If you look it up, I'm sure you'll see it. They're not expensive. They come with all kinds of different bits. And if you're working on a gun, it's good to have the right bit. Like, not every flathead is created equal, especially if you're talking about a finely tuned gun or good fit and finish. Yeah, you could probably turn it with a butter knife, but having a proper fit of screwdriver, Phillips head, flathead, hex, Torx, that's kind of important. And there's a lot of bits that come in that Winchester kit. I have used it I don't know how many times. It was one of those kind of holiday gifts somebody got me that I actually use a ton. So whether you need one to work on your guns or you're kind of thinking of a good gift to get somebody that's into guns, that Winchester kit, and there's probably other brands. I'm sure Wheeler probably makes good stuff. I have some other gunsmithing stuff, but the Winchester one, it's not expensive. Seems to be very good quality. Comes with a lot of bits. And it's just a good handy thing to have if you're talking about modifying guns. With that, tactical verse of the day. I mentioned Psalm 23. That's a small portion of that is on the back plate of it. Has a Bible verse on there. And you'll see that's nothing new either. It reminds me of a story of Constantine when he saw the vision in the sky from God. He instructed his soldiers to inscribe Christian symbols on their weapons, their armor. I forget what it was, shields or armor or something. It's nothing new. Anyway, for today's tactical verse, I'm going to recite to you Psalm 23. And just remember, there is no contradiction in being a strong warrior and a strong man of God. David, Gideon, Abraham, Moses. In fact, I think this world needs a lot more strong warrior Christian men. Men who are willing to fight. With that, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.